been thinking, okay? The main reason why I don't like doing tier lists, like just straight up power tier lists, is because it's hard to put all of the relevant information on a tier list. And people seeing out of context thoughts of mine and potentially basing their decision to pull off of that is something I'm not comfortable with, right? But basically nobody pulls for the 4 stars specifically on a banner. And so I could do a tier list for the 4 stars only. That could be interesting. So that's what we're gonna do. First things first, we're gonna put all the 5 stars at the bottom, because they suck, and I don't like them. Might as well. Who cares? No one's interested in my thoughts on her anyways. Don't think I missed any, so let's do it. Let me put both me, and you on the right. Okay, how do I want to set up the tiers? Always great, or very pog, but only at C6. Because I think it's important when you're looking at the 4 stars, especially with a lot of the recent 4 stars, some of them are actually really good at C6, but fucking worthless without it, right? And like, those characters at C6 are better than the average, like, whatever characters, but they just fucking suck before it. Okay, challenging to clear with, or incredibly niche with little power. So, for example, an example of something that's incredibly niche with little power is Yunjin, right? Where she's a very, very niche character that only works for a very specific thing. And she's not even that good at it, to the point where generic supports are often better than she is at what she does. I guess I'll separate the two. Challenging to clear with, unless you're just playing Hyperbloom, and aware. These are going to be our tiers. Okay? I think we can start with the, with the first one. Yeah. Xingqiu is the best 4-star in the game. He's the best character in the game. I mean, hey, we go back to what we were doing earlier, right? With Xingqiu, we were clearing almost as quickly as with Yelan or Candace or... I mean, we were clearing faster than Ayato, but like, we're clearing almost as quickly, except we got hit by the nuke attack and we survived it. And we didn't get staggered by it. What the fuck is that character? What is that character, man? Like, huh? No, but like, to actually go on about my thoughts on Xingqiu, and I want to like clarify, I don't like Xingqiu. I think that from a balance perspective, it is nice that the best character in the game is a 4-star, but his design makes it really difficult to design other off-field Hydra units, because he just fucking does everything. Yelan's design is really boring because she just does a part of what Xingqiu does, and that's kind of it, right? That's what she does, that's her kit, and that's kind of boring. Like, from a designs perspective, he is restrictive for Hydra unit designs. And I don't like that. On top of that, I think he's a fucking loser with a cringe-ass personality. The reason why I always talk about how good he is because he's good. He single-handedly offers enough Hydro application to enable basically any team that wants Hydro. He does pretty good damage. He offers you, I'd say, arguably generally the second best form of defensive utility in the game that actually becomes the best under specific circumstances, namely when paired with a lot of healing, right? So, what I mean by this is, generally, if you want one character to prevent you from dying, Zhongli is going to be the best at that. But if you have a good form of sustained healing, if you're taking 10k damage every, like, 3 or 4 seconds, it's going to destroy your Zhongli's shield and then kill you. With Xingqiu, it deals damage to you, and then you heal it back up because you're dividing this incoming damage by 2, so it makes it so you're never getting one shot, and your healers can heal it back up all the time, right? So his form of defensive utility is, by itself, worse than something like Zhongli, but situationally better. And that's with the fact that he is a unit that actually straight up enables most fucking Hydro comps in the game, and deals pretty reasonable personal damage. Right? All of this to say, Xingqiu's the best character in the game. Because he does so much, he actually has overlap with a few more units than some of the characters that I think are a lot worse than he is. And because of that, whales that have a lot of different characters often end up benching Xingqiu. Either because they don't like him or any other reason. And him being the best unit in the game at a baseline doesn't necessarily mean that you will always want to play him on one of your teams on your account. But in my opinion, that's not enough to take away from how strong he is. Next up, I think I want to move to... Should we just do it in this order, or should we try to do high to low? I'm going to just do it in the order they're in here. I mean, we moved Yunjin because I was using her to explain what this tier was. Right? And the thing about Yunjin is, like, in the teams where she is synergistic, she's not actually bad. She is one of the options you can use. And often, she's somewhat competitive with the other support options. But she's incredibly niche, and she's not better, like, she's not significantly better than alternatives in her niche, which makes her overall a character that's just not worth that much. Next up, Lisa. See, Lisa is actually a very interesting one, because I think 2 months ago, I probably would have put her in here. But now, I think I'll put her here. I think Aggravate Lisa is fine, and Hyperbloom Lisa is not good. Like, she's fine in Aggravate, but, like, you're playing her because you don't have another option, not because it's good. Or because you really like her, right? That being said, her synergy with Nebulette teams and her decent-ish utility in Chevreuse teams, and her decent-ish utility in Chevreuse teams is enough to put her as a pretty okay character. She's far from great, but I think that she's pretty alright. Amber just goes in nowhere, I think. Like, she has some very, very niche utility, like C6 elegy, but, like, even then, yeah, it's just, yeah. Alright, next up, Noelle. I think Noelle is somewhere between the bottom of this tier and the top of this tier. I'm not sure where I'd want to put her. I think she can be at the bottom of this one. I think that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I think she makes it here. Sure. Barbara. Barbara goes into the challenging to clear with unless you're just playing Hyperbloom. I guess I can do Hyperbloom / Nilo. Right? Because, like, that's where you play Barbara. You play Barbara if you don't have better options for Nilo or Hyperbloom teams. She's actually kind of decent in Nilo teams, but like, there's no such thing as a bad Hydro unit for Nilo teams. So it's hard for me to really value that too much. I think this is where she... Because the thing is, she's not really a niche unit, but I would feel somewhat comfortable putting her on the same or similar-ish power level as Yunjin. As, like, one of the options for some niche teams, or, like, for some specific teams. But, like, she's not really niche, so I'd have to, like, change the wording. I don't wanna. This is why tier lists suck. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. Barbara has no niche. Kogami for most teams is the same unit, but better. I mean, in Nilo, Barbara is better than Kogami when you're dealing with multi-wave that spawns far away from each other. And even when you're not, she's relatively similar. Okay, Sucrose. Honestly, this should not surprise any of you guys. Sucrose is very pog. She's not quite Xingqiu tier, but she is, like... I think she's definitely top 10 units in the game. I don't know if she makes it to top 5. Probably not. Not anymore, I don't think. Top 10 and 4 stars? No. Top 10 overall. She's definitely top 5 4 stars. Before 3.0, she would be top 5 for sure. I would agree, I think. And it's not that Sucrose became worse or has bad synergy with new teams. It's just that they released more strong characters, right? There's just more characters that are competing for those top 5 slots now. I think both Sucrose and Kazuha would not be in my top 5 nowadays. Anyways, next up, Fischl. So, Fischl is at the bottom of Very Pong. Because she is Very Pog at C6, but her Constellations do a decent amount for her. And I don't think she's gonna be like the other units I'm gonna put here, in the sense that, like, you need C6 for her to be worth using on your account. I think she's definitely still good without the C6. So, I feel comfortable putting her above this tier. But she does scale with Constellations in a way that so does Xingqiu's Constellations. Doesn't matter. Xingqiu's still here at C0. I think C0 Xingqiu is not the best unit in the game, but he is the best 4-star. And he's definitely... I think he's definitely top 3. Is Xingqiu tier only for Xingqiu? Yeah. I want to make it very clear that the gap between Xingqiu and any other unit is pretty big. Would you consider Yelan better than C0 Xingqiu? Overall, no, but I think that they're a lot closer. I think C0 Xingqiu versus C0 Yelan is actually competitive, and it's gonna depend on what you want on your team. Because, like, again, people keep forgetting. C0 Xingqiu has the same amount of defensive utility as C6. And his defensive utility is fucking insane. At C0 Xingqiu versus C0 Yelan, he is a balanced unit in the sense that Yelan actually does significantly more damage with her personal damage plus her damage buff, in a way that makes it balanced, where you are trading off some damage for that defensive utility, right? And at that point, I think they're comparable, and I think that it's really just, do you want to go more defensive or more offensive? I think they're around the same level if he's C0. I think if he's C6, that's not the case, though. What about C6 versus C2 Yelan? I think C6 Xingqiu versus C2 Yelan is similar to C0 Xingqiu versus C0 Yelan. At that point, the additional damage you're doing from Yelan and the additional Hydro app actually makes it so that you are gaining something pretty significant as a trade-off for your defensive utility. I just think that at C0 Yelan, what you're gaining in terms of damage just isn't worth it. The only benefit Xingqiu has is that he applies a bit more Hydro and is a 4-star, so easy to get. Again, that's just not true. His biggest benefit is a defensive utility. Yeah, also a little bit more Hydro kind of matters in a lot of teams. And also, yeah, it's not really a little bit more Hydro. It's a little bit more Hydro if you're playing a range character and you're not getting, like, melee rain sword application, right? But on melee characters, it's a lot more Hydro. Defensive utility doesn't make it better than Yelan, I don't know. I mean, that's a fine opinion. I personally think that defensive utility is valuable. Because, well, for most people it is. and I don't really give a shit what the best unit for speedrunning is. I give a shit what the best unit for the average player is. Like, in 1.0, enemies just didn't really do enough damage for defensive utility to matter that much. And they weren't aggressive enough, and their attacks were so telegraphed and easy to dodge. Right? Nowadays, that's just not the case anymore, right? Consecrated Beast, when there's multiple of them, Coplia, the fucking Breacher Primuses. Like, there's just so much damage that is pseudo-unavoidable. Where, like, avoiding it will make you lose a lot of, like, DPS window. If you're doing less than 30-second clear, you won't need defensive utility, but if you take longer, it's better to have defensive utility, or it's going to take even longer. Yeah, like, if you can clear enemies in one rotation, defensive utility doesn't matter that much, because there's only going to be around one time where you might get fucked, and if you die, you can just reset, and if you just take a lot of damage, you can just heal up after you've killed the enemies, right? But if it's taking you more than one rotation to kill enemies, defensive utility starts mattering a lot more. Anyways. Isn't Xiangling C4 above Xingqiu? Definitely not. Anyways, Kaya! Or Kaya. He's okay-ish. Not great. Good enough to clear stuff, but nothing more than okay-ish. Razor! Yeah, I'm gonna stop adding shit here and I'm just gonna say Dendro. Razor does have a team that's pretty decent. It's not an amazing team, but it is good enough to clear stuff. And he is pretty synergistic with the team, but also it's not like he's doing that much. The core of the team is already really strong even without him. Isn't C6 Yunjin better than Bennett and Yoimiya? Tested multiple times. I'd say she's niche, but not little power. I mean, you know what Bennett gives that Yunjin doesn't? Fucking healing. I don't think Bennett is worse if he's C6. But, like, there are situations where she is competitive with the strong general supports. But just being competitive, like something you can replace Bennett with in one specific team if you're willing to lose the healing, like, that's not enough, right? Like, a niche support, in order to actually be, you know, in here instead of in here, needs to be like Faruzan level of better than the alternatives in the teams where it's good, right? It can't just be a decent alternative. If she was viable like she is in Yoimiya teams, in a lot of different teams, then she'd move up to okay-ish. But she's just not. Anyways, Bennett. Bennett is at the top of very pog. Bennett is the only character in the game that I think you can make a reasonable argument for being better than Xingqiu. I would heavily disagree, because I think what Xingqiu provides is just significantly better. But what Bennett does for your account, basically, he's not really balanced around defensive utility. Nowadays, while his healing is good, the self-pyro app can be enough that you just get fucking one-shot so the healing doesn't matter. And in a lot of teams, he's more of a danger defensively than an upside. But his offensive power is good for basically every type of account. There are going to be very, very few players where their two best teams doesn't have one of them that uses. Like, I think it's pretty much exclusively if you have, like, hyper-invested Nilo on one side and hyper-invested Nevilet on the other. Or maybe hyper-invested Hyperbloom teams. But so many of the carries have Bennett as part of their best teams, even if you have basically all your characters at C6. Right? That I think he's a reasonable choice for best unit in the game, even though I don't consider him. Or is there a tab open on Zajef eating an eggplant? Why wouldn't there be? Why is Xingqiu on top? Because, like I said, I think it's a reasonable argument, but I disagree. I'm glad you at least believe it's reasonable. Yeah, like, at the end of the day, right? There are multiple different things that characters do. And there's no objective way to determine which one is more valuable, right? Some characters Or like some things that are provided, like defensive utility, are only valuable in some situations, right? And there's no objective way to determine how much that matters versus healing, like how much shielding versus healing versus like you're gonna have to exert a certain amount of subjectivity, right? I think that the few units that I think are reasonable to consider as the best unit in the game are Xingqiu, Bennett, Neuvillette, Nahida, and Zhongli. I think these are the 5 that, like, I think if your opinion on who the best unit in the game isn't one of those, I would find myself in heavy disagreement with you. Zhongli's an interesting pick for top 5. He is not even close to my top 10 of characters, right? But I understand that what he provides for some players is just the best thing a character can provide. And I think that it's completely reasonable for someone to think that that Zhongli is the best character in the game. Even if I don't consider him to be. Right? Can you give me a good reason for no Kazuha in top 5? I mean, I guess you could make the argument for it. I guess it's somewhat reasonable if you don't care how much better than the alternatives a character is. Like, the reason why I don't consider Kazuha to be all that insane is because Sucrose is such a strong alternative that Kazuha is, like, while strong, one of the furthest from necessary strong characters in the game. But I guess it would be reasonable. If you don't care that there's a character that in a lot of situations is better than him or similar to him, you value the situations where he's better more than the situations where he's worse, you value how easier or how easy it is to group with him, then I guess it's reasonable to have him as your best character in the game. I think it's a bit more of a stretch than the other characters I mentioned, though. I think you're underrating the usefulness of Kazuha grouping for people who can't brute force AoE content. I guess my main counter-argument to that is, why isn't Neuvillette just better for those players, then? I could see someone considering Kazuha to be above Xingqiu, but the arguments why you'd consider Kazuha above Xingqiu would also apply to Neuvillette, and I think they should apply more to Neuvillette than they do to Kazuha. So... oh no. Where the fuck does she go? Oh, where? She's not that bad, though. Yeah, like, she's pretty decent in Navia teams, right? Like, she's a she's pretty worthless as a character, but she has teams that have a lot of synergy with her kit. So even though her numbers are ass, she is still somewhat synergistic in those teams, right? Like, I'd put her somewhere between Yunjin and Amber. But, like, I don't want to put her here, because, like, maybe at the bottom of this tier. Alright, Beidou. I think Beidou's at the bottom of here. I think, like, realistically, I'd put her here, but, like, that's not real, right? Like, it's yeah. Beidou kind of fell off. Not really. Like, she's not very popular. Just because, honestly, I don't really know why. Right? But, like, she's a really good teammate for all Hytham teams. As, like, a defensive option for all Hytham teams. Both Aggravate and Quickbloom on Hytham. Is she? Yeah, she really is. Like, if you're playing Beidou Xingqiu, Kuki, you're basically invulnerable. If you're playing an Aggravate team, like Kuki... I guess it's because it's hard to fit both her and Nahida. No, but even then, right? In Aggravate teams, you're playing Alhaitham, Nahida, Kuki, and then your last slot can be Yai, but Beidou is, like, pretty similar damage in AoE and so much better for the defensive utility. But it is worse in single target, so, like, I guess that's why people don't like it that much. She's pretty good in Chevaleur's teams. Similar Inui when 2 targets. No, it's also when it's more. Like, when is your Yai burst hitting more than 2 targets? Be honest with yourself. I think she's quite on the same level as Fischl or Bennett. Yeah, that's fair. That's why it should be at the bottom of this. Like, I'm considering adding another tier in between these two. But I don't know. I think for now I'll keep her here. And I'll reconsider later. Xiangling! Okay. This is actually very difficult. Is Xiangling better than Fischl? I think she's pretty much 100% worse than Sucrose. And 100% better than Beto. But is she better than Fischl? I think their upsides are very different, right? Like, Xiangling's biggest upside is that she's effectively just a main damage. I guess, actually, it's not that different from Fischl. I was gonna say, she's effectively just a main damage dealer in basically all of her teams. Or most of her teams, at least. But Fischl is, too. Xiangling tends to be better for speedruns. She tends to have more situations where she's great, because she's AoE. When you say she's tied to Bennett due to ER, I think that's a pretty big misconception that people have. Yes, in a lot of teams, like, you can't just... In most teams, you can't just use her as a random pyro off-field applicator. But in a lot of the teams where you use Xiangling without Bennett, you're playing rotations that are pretty flexible and that allow you to get 2 Guobas per rotation. And when you do that, she has one of the best particle generations of for like all the characters. Especially if you do it with Kitane, she is definitely one of the characters that generates the most energy. But like with 2 Guobas per rotation, that's 8 fucking particles. That's a lot of particles, man. Over how long? If you can do 24 or 25 second rotations, so generally in teams with Fischl. But the point I'm making is you can get away with a relatively low ER on Xiangling in a decent amount of teams that don't actually use Bennett. Her ER requirements, actually, unless what you're playing is specifically like Sucrose National or Kazuha National, her ER requirements are actually generally lower in teams where she doesn't use Bennett. Because in a lot of Bennett teams, you're only doing 1 Bennett E per rotation. And that's just not that many particles. Next up, Chongyun. Okay, so the thing about Chongyun is that... Okay, Chongyun is not a good character. But he's not as bad as you'd think. Because cooldown reduction is actually really valuable. The problem is, cooldown reduction is only valuable if it is actually leading to shorter rotations. Right? Cooldown reduction doesn't do anything if your rotations aren't made shorter because of it. If you're still having the same rotation length, then the cooldown reduction you get from his C2 doesn't really do anything. But if you are playing your rotations really tight and taking advantage of this the C2 to actually straight up get 15% faster rotations, well, that's a lot of DPS you're gaining, right? That's a pretty good amount of DPS. That's nice. And there are some teams where he offers something that isn't completely worthless. Like the Xiangling national team with Chongyun, right? Because of that, he's actually not that terrible of an option. The biggest problem is that very often, you're not trying to maximize your DPS. You're trying to maximize the damage that your rotation is, and while still having a rotation that isn't too long, right? And what I mean by that is doing a 17-second rotation instead of 20 seconds. If you still need 2 rotations to clear, like if you're still clearing in the middle of your second rotation, you'll end up with a very similar clear time to a 20-second rotation that kills a little bit earlier into that second rotation. And so the slightly higher DPS doesn't actually practically translate to a significant difference in clear time. What that means is that if you have 2 different rotations that have the same amount of DPS, the one that's longer will generally perform better in practice. And that's something that works against Chongyun. All of this to say, I don't think he's that bad. He's a fine option for stuff like Xiangling teams. Next up, Diona. And honestly, I'm gonna put Diona in okayish. I think she's a bit better now than she used to be. Her C6 used to be pretty worthless because there just weren't any teams where you both wanted to use Diona and wanted EM. Chongyun was one of the first characters I got, and I played him with EM Razor. Are you a TCG player by any chance? Anyways, next up, Shenyan. She goes in Aware. Not good. Not good. Bad character. The biggest issue is that the very few use cases that she has is as an off-field pyro applicator plus shielder that isn't reliant on normal attacks, unlike Thoma. But she stops applying pyro if her shield is broken, which makes her an unreliable pyro applicator. Next up, Rosaria. Rosaria goes in okayish, right next to Kaya, and I put Kaya above because he is cooler and more pog. Cool it! This moment will be frozen in time. Alright, Yanfei. I don't know. I don't think she's really niche, but I'm kind of tempted to place her somewhere around here. Maybe just bottom of okayish is where she should go. She's fine. Sayu. So here's the problem. Sayu isn't niche. And she's not really challenging to clear with. You can kind of just use her as VV in any team that wants VV. But she's also not okayish. And she's also not aware. So, like, I don't know where I want to place her. Yeah, I guess she is a niche character because she's an exploration character. Sure, fuck it. She's here. Alright. Sara. Faruzan tier, you are delusional. If you think Sara is Faruzan tier, you are actively delusional. I'll put her here. I don't think she quite breaks into okayish. She's pretty ass. Sara with Travelers is OP. It's not OP, it's fine. What about at C6? This is at C6. She's like here at C0. Alright, Thoma. I think Thoma is at the top of okayish. Maybe I should make another tier, actually. Okay, fine. I've convinced myself. Where we put Beto and Thoma. New tier, true. Solid characters that are mostly played because... Just solid characters. But generally, these characters, it's like... The main reason... They're not that insanely strong. Like, they're good at what they do. But, like, if they were to release them today as a 5-star character, they'd be stronger. And it's very possible that they just will. It's very possible that we get a defensive-offensive mix Electro character released in the future that just outshines Beto. That would be strong enough to, like, make it into very pog. And same for Thoma as a Pyro Shielder. Like, effectively, they're very power creepable characters that currently just don't have anyone that's competing for them for their niche. Competing with them for their niche, sorry. They're right, so they're good, but power creepable pretty easily. Same can be said for Xiangling? No, I don't think so. Like, obviously, you could also power creep Xiangling, but I don't think... Like, I think a character that is released that just power creeps Xiangling would be significantly stronger than other, like, new character releases we've had. Whereas I think that you could have a character release that is pretty much direct power creep to Beto, that is in line with other recent releases in terms of power, right? In other words, the character wouldn't need to be actually broken to do these characters' jobs, but better. But they're still good characters, and they do something that's valuable. Does Thoma see a lot of use outside of Burgeon? Surprisingly, he sees a decent amount of use. He's just generally the best pyro option for shielders. And also, the best general option for shielders for people that don't have Zhongli. Lila's not as good of a shielder because her kit functions only if her shield isn't broken, right? Like, she's a shielder where you don't want the shield to get broken because if you do, she stops doing her job. So she's a shielder where you still have to dodge incoming attacks, otherwise she stops doing her job. Whereas Thoma, if your shield gets broken, you do a normal attack, you get a mini shield back up, you even regain some resistance to interruption, right? Like, I just think that as a generic shielder option, Thoma just does his job so much better than Lila does. I've been liking Lila for Arlecchino teams as someone without Zhongli. Arlecchino teams with what other characters? Or like vape teams? I think Lila's fine in vape teams with Xingqiu. Or in Monopyro teams. I think she's kind of worthless with Yelan or Candace or Gogomi or whatever because she steals your vapes. Like, you not really lose vapes with her. So it's kind of ass. If you don't have a better shielder option, like, you don't have a choice. But, yeah. You can lose vapes, which is rough. Anyways, Goro! I think Goro is, like, the very bottom of very Pog, but no, you know what? Maybe he doesn't even make... I mean, he kind of does. Like, I don't know. He's pretty niche, but he's not on the same level as these characters. Like, he's a lot better for his teams. Yeah, I'll put him here for now. I might reconsider this. Kuki! Kuki goes in very Pog. How high in very Pog? I'm not sure. So, isn't she kind of bad without Dendro? Yeah, but she's not, like, a cope Dendro option. She's the core of a lot of Dendro teams. She's amazing, but it's only one archetype. Rest of very Pog have more teams. It's not only one archetype. She's also good in Quicken teams. Like, Raiden feels so much better than Kuki. I agree. But it's one of those instances where, like, I don't think you can realistically expect someone to generally be playing Hyperbloom on both sides. And Kuki does the job already. Is it worth pulling Raiden as an upgrade to Kuki? Especially when Kuki is better in some teams, right? Like, I'd rather play Kuki with Hytham. Like, if it were me, I would, because I really don't like playing her. But Kuki has gained more value in Hyperbloom teams with Farina. Barely. She's Thoma level? No, definitely not. I think I'm comfortable putting her here. Heizo! This might be controversial. Heizo is at the bottom of solid characters. The main reason why people tend to dislike Heizo is because there are better options. Which is true. There are better options than him. But he doesn't feel bad to play. When you are playing him, he is strong in his teams. He is weaker than Sucrose and than Kazuha. But he still does his job. More than well enough to clear stuff with those teams. And overall, he is just a solid character. Mainly in Aggravate and Taser. Yeah, I don't like him in Taser that much. I think Taser's a lot more... The main thing that Taser has going for it, at this point, like, it's not a very high damage team, but it's a high utility team. And so, playing Taser instead of Sucrose feels kind of ass, because the utility is just lost. A lot of the utility is lost. So it's mainly in Aggravate teams, I think. And to some extent, in, like, National, he's fine as well. He's fine in, like, Faruzan teams, but he's not great. He's just fine. Isn't Sucrose much better in Aggravate? Yes. And that's why she is close to the top of very Pog, and he is at the bottom of Solid. Again, right? The reason why people perceive him as really bad is because he has direct competition that is pretty much always strictly better. But that direct competition is such a fucking strong unit that him being worse doesn't mean he's bad. Kole! I would put Kole in incredibly niche with little power. Like, yeah, she's... You can play her in basically any Dendro archetype, but she's not good in Hyperbloom. And she's just fine in Aggravate, right? Like, realistically, Aggravate teams are generally built either with a Dendro healer or with a Dendro damage dealer. And she does not look good when you compare her to Nahida. So the main team where you really, like, consider Cole over other options is in Nilo teams, because you need more than one Dendro unit. If you could have two Nahidas, Cole would fucking get out of here. Worthless character. But you can't, right? So, as, like, the second Dendro option in Nilo teams, she's like, she can be good in some situations, but she's not, like, significantly better than other options. She's one of the options that has upside over others, which is namely a bit more flexibility in rotations when you're playing her with Sackbow. But yeah, overall, she's Dory! I'm sorry, chat. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't. Bro, she's actually good at C6, man. I mean, okay. The problem is, I don't think she's as Pog at C6 as the other characters that are going to be in this tier. But I feel wrong putting her in a tier that doesn't specifically say C6. So I think for now, I'll leave her at the bottom of this tier. Explain this. She, at C6 with TF, she effectively has permanent Electro Infusion, and her damage isn't great, but she is a character that consolidates healing while being able to proc both Quicken and Hyperbloom, which means that in teams where you're running Farina, Nahida, Fischl, you get to basically max out your fanfare for your Nahida, Farina, and Fischl damage, while still having a Hyperbloom trigger. That also does somewhat reasonable damage just from their attacks and E through Quicken. TF and WoW weapon, any EM/ER weapon / crit, honestly, you can use Serpent Spine on her, it's fine. Candace. If you asked me this 2 days ago, I would have put her in Aware. Or maybe in here, right? Because she does have some utility. And now I would put her at the top of Incredibly Niche with little power. Like, if I had to choose between Candace on an Arlecchino team and Sara on a Raiden team, not even close. 100% Candace on the Arlecchino team. You know? But she needs C6, right? Otherwise she just doesn't work. Yeah, the C6 also kind of applies to Sara. That's true. Is it a meme, though? Would you ever choose her over Xingqiu Yelan? I was getting consistently faster clear on Chamber 1 of this Abyss with Candace than Xingqiu and Yelan. I think if you're just vibing, I'd still pick Xingqiu over her, just because damage reduction broken. But a very specific situation. Yeah, that's fair. But just, like, in general in AoE scenarios, why AoE Hydro? Yeah, AoE Hydro. And 30% normal attack damage bonus, which isn't bad. And short animations, which is really nice. Like, in practice, there's more Hydro uptime on Candace than there is on Yelan, because on Yelan you have to burst before Bennett burst. Otherwise you lose too much uptime because the animation is a movie. Whereas on Candace, you burst after Bennett burst. And Candace EQ animation is honestly pretty similar in length to just Yelan E. You do have to actively try not to get a counter, though, because the counter animation is longer. Which is kind of funny, right? If you get a counter, you just... you know, it becomes worse. Anyways, Lila is next, and honestly, I'm not sure if I want to put her in solid or okay. I think she's at the top of okay. Her biggest upside is that one of the few characters she actually has synergy with is Neuvillette, and Neuvillette's pretty good. And having synergy with a good character is better than having synergy with a bad character. But I just don't think she's good enough to make it into solid. She better than Diona? I think so, yeah. There's some teams where Diona's better, but generally she's better than Diona. Next up, Faruzan. Faruzan is the reason why this tier exists. Very pog, but only at C6. Fucking worthless at C5. Great at C6. Like, the difference C6 makes is insane. You generate significantly more particles in your rotation. You shorten her uptime, like her field time requirements. And you get a massive damage buff. Shouldn't Sara be on that tier too then? No, because Sara's just not good enough to make it into this tier. She is not very pog at C6. She's fine at C6. I'd argue that at C5 she's still very good for Shao and Wander. She's a somewhat competitive option. But she'd be incredibly niche with little power at C0. Or C5, whatever. The difference C6 makes is insane. Like, the main one is the ER requirement, but like, it gives her actual personal damage. It makes her uptime, like her field time requirements shorter. It significantly increases your particle generation, both for her and for the rest of your team. And it gives a pretty big damage buff. Like, her Constellation does what 4 Constellations should do. Yao Yao! I'm not sure if she's at the top of Solid or in very pog. I think she's at the top of Solid. No, I don't. Yes, I do. I don't know. I think it's really hard to evaluate Dendro units because Nahida's so fucking far ahead of the competition that in most teams you'd rather run a healer on one of your other elements than have to lose out on Nahida. Because she just does so much. Right? Dendro teams want to be able to use Nahida. But not everyone has Nahida. And if you don't have Nahida, then you definitely would rather use Yao Yao as a healer than like Kuki in a Quicken team or something like that, right? Like in Aggravate teams, if you're playing something like, I don't know, Kutsing, Fischl, Kazuha, right? Like, you're basically choosing, am I replacing my Kutsing or Fischl with Kuki? Or my Nahida with Yao Yao? And in teams like that, she is actually competitive with Nahida. I do think you can make a solid argument for either. I think I'll put her here. Mika. Oh, that's hard. I think Mika is going to be towards the top of Incredibly Niche with Little Power. The thing about Mika is, like, he's actually kind of good at what he does, but we don't have good physical carries, right? Like, if they actually release a good physical carry, he could be in very pog, but only at C6. Like, I think he would belong there. It's just that we don't have a good physical carry right now. One day. One day. Kave! Kave goes nowhere. I'm sorry. No. He makes your Dendro teams worse. He yoinks your Hyperblooms. Kirara! Kirara, I think, is a solid character. I think the main thing that's keeping Kirara out of very pog is that her shield is good, but I don't think it's really necessarily enough to expect the average player to be able to get through a run without it breaking. And unlike other shielders like Lila, Zhongli, you're not playing Kirara in teams that have Bennett. Right? Running a healer on top of Kirara has a huge opportunity cost. If you're running a healer, you generally don't want to have to run Kirara. You'd rather be able to run Nahida, right? She's like Dendro Sayu? No, because she actually doesn't feel like asked to play. But yeah, like, I think the fact that Quicken teams, which is generally where you would play her, because she doesn't have enough app for Hyperbloom. She's fine in Nilo, I guess, but yeah. It's mainly for Quicken teams, right? And Quicken teams don't have a passive healer that is in the team because of their offensive capabilities that you would want to run even if you're running a shielder, right? And because of that, I don't love shielders that don't offer any healing, because you're going to take chip. I think the average player is going to take chip damage over time, and you're just going to kind of die. Especially because most people don't refresh their shields as soon as they can, which means you're going to spend some time unshielded. Any damage you take during that is permanent. Right? So Diona should be higher? No, because Diona's not a character that you play in Quicken teams. It specifically applies for Quicken teams because there is no unit that you would play in Quicken teams that is a very strong offensive option that also, on top of that, provides healing. Right? Where the fuck are you playing Diona, but not Bennett? Her healing doesn't really matter because you're already playing Bennett. Right? If there was an Electro Bennett that gave like a massive EM buff or something, and gave a little bit of healing, I think Kirara's value would shoot up to very Pong. But I just think that when it comes to Quicken teams, your only form of defensive option being a non-100% uptime shield, like, it can be... How much time does it last again? I forgot. Okay, so it lasts for 12 seconds. So if you're swapping back to her every 12 seconds, it is 100% uptime, right? But I don't think there's... Yeah. But most people don't. So, same as Lila? Yeah, same as Lila, right? What is practically, for most people, a, like, 70% uptime shield? Just isn't enough in a team that doesn't passively run healing. It can be enough if you, like, really know what you're doing, and you're willing to reset if you actually accidentally get your shield broken. But I wouldn't recommend her over Yao Yao. Lynette. I'm gonna think about it. Give me a second. There's actually no way Chongyun, Ningguang, Yunjin, Sayu are on the same tier as Candace, Sara, Mika. You know, I think it's really funny that I don't actually know which cluster of units you think is supposed to be higher than the others. Wait, I feel like I could interpret it either way. Oh. I think Lynette is an okay-ish. I think at C6, I would consider her better than Hazo, but not quite very Pog. And she's a lot more Constellation dependent than Hazo. C6 is very Pog? No. On the same level as these units at C6? No, definitely not. Nah. Fucking yapping. Definitely not. And I don't want to add a solid at C6 tier. I'll just put those characters in okay-ish. Let me know. You know, I don't actually think he's in Aware. I think he's in Challenging to Clear With unless you're just playing Dendro. I'd rather play him than these characters, for sure. Also worth noting, he's actually not completely terrible at C6 with C6 Mika as, like, just a straight-up carry. He's not good, but he's not that bad either. Can you explain him and his kid in Razor language? Press Q, start swimming under the water. Press E, do 2 normal attacks. Press E again. Repeat. Charlotte! Man, I don't like this character. She's not completely worthless, but I think she just barely makes it into the okay-ish tier. She is only somewhat useful in Farina teams, and only because of Farina. And she is probably the character that is the most prone to just getting directly power crept. any real cryo healer that does literally anything else is gonna make her basically worthless. Like Mika, but Mika's not cryo. Like, he has cryo in his sheet and shit, but he doesn't actually do cryo. He hits one cryo attack over a whole rotation. Anyways, Sucrose! I think Sucrose isn't very pog. I think at C6 you can make an argument that she's a bit higher in very pog. But aside from like maybe C1, her Constellations on the way to C6 are pretty worthless. And she's a very new character. It's really hard to actually have her at C6. Next up, Gaming! You guys remember when people thought Gaming was gonna be the best 4-star carry? Gaming is a sheet character. He's a character that looks really good on sheets, but has so many practical issues that he just does not actually perform in practice as well as you would expect just looking at sheet DPS. I think I would put him maybe at the bottom. Yeah, maybe here. Like, he's not a bad character, but he's the sort of character where it is very possible that you have to reset a few times to clear. But when you get a good clear, it's actually going to be fast, right? I think it's the best way to describe him, right? A good Gaming clear is actually pretty fast. But you might have to reset like 5 times for things to actually line up well so that you get a good clear. Alright, and the last 4-star on this list, Sethos, who's not out yet. I am expecting him to be somewhere around here. He's got the same thing as Lynette, where I think he's solid at C6, but he's very C6 reliant. Well, not very, but like the difference between C0 and C6 is pretty big. And I don't think he's actually strong enough to qualify for very pog at C6. So he can't really be in here. Yeah, so I guess that's the list. Pog. We're done. Any thoughts? You guys want me to do the Travelers? I can do the Travelers. We'll do the Archons from each region as stand-ins for the Travelers. How's that? Zhongli, Venti, Raiden, Nahida, and Farina. Farina? Farina? Question mark? I guess? Okay. Imagine someone please don't screenshot this out of context. Hydro MC is the worst character in the game, I think. Pretty safely. Yeah, wait. Archons are MC. Alright, GOMC. I think GOMC would just be slightly better than Ning. Animo MC. Animo MC, I think, is towards the bottom / middle of Okage. Kind of just a fine character. Has the same issues as Hazo and Lynette, obviously. But unlike Hazo and Lynette, you're guaranteed to start with him, and he is the one character that should carry your early game. Electro MC, I think, is in here. You can use it as a really, really cope Hyperbloom trigger, or in the Thundering Fury team, and it's fine, but like, yeah. And then finally, Dendro MC. I think at the bottom of solid. The thing about Dendro MC is, like, if Nahito wasn't in the game, I think Dendro MC would be in very pog. I think Hyperbloom team's baseline is strong enough. Maybe not. I don't know, man. 3 tiers higher than Cole, yeah. Because Cole is just ass in Hyperbloom. Like, Dendro MC is actually decent in Hyperbloom teams. Like, if you're playing double Hydro Hyperbloom, Dendro MC is actually pretty decent there. Cole is just ass in that team. They both have their upsides in Nilo teams. I think Cole is generally a little bit ahead of him in Nilo teams, but not by that much. So yeah, that's the list. Any thoughts? Any questions? Any feedback?